I recently shared with you my ultimate espresso martini recipe, which I'll link above. But today I'm going to show you 5 different ways you can make an amazing espresso martini at home. Let's make some coffee cocktails. Welcome back to the Coffee Cocktail channel with me, Dan Fellows. So before we get started making some espresso martinis, it'd be amazing if you could subscribe to the channel if you've been enjoying the videos and gaining value from the content, and feel free to share it with your friends who are into coffee or cocktails or even both, just like me. So the espresso martini is an amazing drink, but it's a really difficult drink to make even if you do have an espresso machine. Take the espresso machine out of the equation and it becomes even more challenging, especially to make at home. But fear not, my friends, today I'm going to show you 5 different ways to make an espresso martini with some things you might have at home, some things you might not, but you might want to get. And we're going to be trying instant coffee, capsules, coffee concentrate, an Aeropress with a Prismo filter, and a Wacaco Picopresso. So before we get started, I want to give a big thank you to my friends at MAHLKONIG for sending this amazing all-round home grinder, the X54, which is a stunning grinder. I'm going to be using it later in the video for the Aeropress and the Wacaco Picopresso. And also thank you to Wacaco for sending the amazing Picopress to me, which I just think they're amazing products, and you can buy them from the links below in the description, and I'd thoroughly recommend you give them a go. So today we're going to be making 5 espresso martinis. I'll be talking you through how to get the very best out of each of these kind of brew methods or ways of making coffee. But let's start by running through the recipe we're going to be using for each drink. So just like in my ultimate espresso martini recipe, we're going to be using 20 ml each of our frozen spirits. First of all, potato vodka. I'm using Colworth Farm Distillery Aval d'Or vodka, which is super creamy, really sweet, has really good body. And then we're going to be using Diplomatico Planas, which is an aged white rum from Venezuela. Has really nice flavors of banana, white chocolate, a little bit of coconut in there, super sweet, really delicious. So the original recipe called for 20 ml of coffee saccharum, which is made using spent espresso pucks, which the whole point of this video is we're not using an espresso machine, so I wouldn't expect you to have on hand. What you could do is go to your local coffee shop and ask for their pucks. You could even ask for the espresso for the whole drink, mitigating this whole process. But today I'm going to substitute out the coffee saccharum for coffee liqueur and a sugar syrup. I recently tasted 20 coffee liqueurs, which I'll link above and in the description below, and there were many that were fantastic. A few were my favorites, but the most accessible of all my favorites is Mr. Black. So we want to get plenty of coffee flavor in our espresso martini at home. We want to use Mr. Black to get that kind of coffee flavor, and it does bring some sweetness. And then we want to sweeten it, which is what the coffee saccharum would have done, bringing coffee flavor and sweetness. So we've established that most great espresso martinis have about 10 grams of sugar in there to be balanced with the intensity of the coffee, the other ingredients. And I know that when I have 25 ml of Mr. Black, we need 5.6 grams of Monin sugar syrup, which is a 2-to-1 ratio. You can use your favorite coffee liqueur, you can use your favorite Monin syrup or sugar syrup at a 2-to-1 ratio, playing around with different sugars. But what I'll do is I'll link below how much sugar syrup you need to add in order to get that 10 grams of sugar to some of my favorite coffee liqueurs and some really popular ones. The final ingredient is going to be our saline solution, 1 part salt to 5 parts water. I'm going to add 1 gram of this to each. And then the full spec is going to be our coffee, which will be 40 ml in total, 20 ml of our potato vodka, 20 ml of our aged white rum, 25 ml of Mr. Black or your favorite coffee liqueur, enough 2-to-1 sugar syrup to make it up to 10 grams of sugar. So I'm going to be adding 5.6 grams of sugar syrup and then 1 gram of our saline. We're going to make each different coffee base. We're going to shake them up, get them as close as we can to espresso strength, and then we're going to have a taste of each and evaluate how we can get the best out of each brew method. So we're going to start with instant coffee as the base of our almost espresso martini. Doesn't obviously contain espresso, but it's going to be pretty close. So let's have a look at that now. Right, so instant coffee. Pretty much everyone's got a jar of instant coffee at home. Most people probably don't buy instant in order to get the best possible flavor and quality in the cup. It's more about convenience. So that's a big pro for instant coffee. A few tips when you buy an instant coffee, regardless of whether it's for an espresso martini or not. Choose the best quality instant coffee you can get hold of. There's some amazing specialty instant coffees on the market, not really in the supermarkets, but try and get something that's high quality if you can. Choose a coffee that's got a flavor profile of nuts and chocolate, particularly for this espresso martini. So this is a blend of coffees from Brazil and Colombia, which ticks that box really nicely. And I'd probably recommend avoiding Robusta because the caffeine content's so much higher in Robusta. And when you see how much coffee you have to put in here to get it to that espresso strength, you probably don't want to be drinking that much Robusta, especially at night time. So, as I said, we're going to try and get our coffee across each of the drinks as close to espresso strength and intensity. And without going too much into extraction theory and getting too technical, I'm going to measure this using a refractometer where I can control the strength. So a refractometer measures essentially the strength of the coffee. So how much dissolved coffee is in the liquid that you put on there to measure. The espressos we were brewing in the Ultimate Espresso Martini had a total dissolved solid content, TDS, which is what this measures, of between 9 and 10.5%, which is 9 to 10.5% of the final liquid being dissolved coffee. In order to get to at least sort of 8% TDS, which is probably the minimum you'd want for espresso, we're going to need to add quite a lot of coffee to our water. 4 grams of instant coffee to be precise, and 36 grams of water. So you'll see this is about twice as much as a regular cup of coffee, according to their recommendations. So then we want to top this up to 40 grams because we want 40 grams of coffee in each drink. And I'm just going to use my regular kettle because that's what most people have. Be as precise as you can. 41, pretty close. And then the final tip, make sure it's fully mixed together before you make the espresso martini. So I'm going to disappear. I'm going to come back with a full espresso martini, and then we'll have a taste of our instant coffee espresso martini and see how we go. Back in a second. So first up, we've got our instant coffee, almost espresso martini. Going to give this a little strain, have a look at it, see how it goes. This looks good. Surprisingly good, in fact. I think purists would be a bit uncomfortable saying you could ever make anything close to an espresso martini with instant coffee. But I think the challenge is always going to be because you're limited by the quality of the instant rather than whether it's possible or not. To me, it looks pretty good, but the proof is in the tasting. So let's give it a go. Cheers. The texture's great. Texture's really, really good. Really kind of smooth, creamy. It tastes pretty good as well. I think the only thing letting this down is we've got pretty good instant coffee in there, but it's never going to be quite as good as an amazingly extracted espresso from something like a Slayer espresso machine. But yeah, the texture's outstanding. Really creamy. It's actually really delicious. I've been served much worse espresso martinis a lot of times. Yeah, the only thing I'm getting a little bit of kind of bitterness and roughness on the finish, but you'd be pretty happy with that. So I measured the TDS, total dissolved solids, of the instant coffee, and it was 8, which is probably the lower end of the strength you look for in espresso. So you've not quite got the intensity you would from an espresso, but that's pretty tasty. Sorry if you're against this, but that's not too bad. So instant coffee, almost espresso martini. It's a reasonably strong start. Now let's have a look at some capsules. So capsules. Before we start, we really need to understand what's going on in this little thing. So what I want to do is show you how much coffee is inside one of these. Because we're not able to control the flow of our extraction or the kind of how well extracted it's going to be, or the grind size of the coffee in here, we want to understand how much coffee is in here to get as close as we can to our dose and yield of our espresso. So in our espresso extraction in the Ultimate Espresso Martini video, we had 20 grams of coffee and a 40 gram yield. And you'll see most capsules have between 5 and 6 grams, some as low as 4, some a little bit higher. This has 5.7 grams in here, which is totally fine, totally standard. But we need to factor this in to when we're designing our brew recipe. So with a machine like this, we're obviously not able to brew espresso strength because we've got such a low dose. So what I'd suggest doing is doing 2 shorter extractions. So 5.6 grams in, and then we're going to pull it to about a 20 gram yield, so 1 to 4 strength. This is much weaker than an espresso, which is more like a 1 to 2, but at least we're doubling up our coffee volume to get it as close as we can to that 1 to 2, settling for a 1 to 4. Because I know this is going to be a lower intensity, we're going to have more of the other flavors coming through in the drink, so I'd recommend leaving out the sugar from this, so we've got more of the coffee flavor coming from the Mr. Black or the coffee liqueur of your choice. So a few tips when you're buying capsules or brewing them. Always give it a little purge to begin with, to flush out the water. And by brewing 2 shorter capsules, we are compromising on the extraction slightly, because it's going to be a quicker extraction, a shorter extraction, and we're not going to pull as much flavor from the coffee. But we're compromising that with the increased strength of having 2 shorter shots. So I've set button 1 to be about a 20 gram yield. So we're going to brew 2 of these. So there we have our 40 grams of coffee. This is made using Wacaco's capsules from Colombia, which have kind of flavor notes of apple, marzipan and milk chocolate. Should be a good fit for our espresso martini. We know it's a lower strength, so this has got a TDS of just under 4. So at least twice as strong as a filter coffee, but significantly less intense than an espresso, which would start at your TDS of around about 8. But we'll see how this goes. We're gonna shake this up, we're gonna omit the sugar, and I'll be back with that in a second. Here we've got our capsule-based espresso martini without the sugar, and it's pretty obvious that this is different visually. So when I pour this out, you'll see it's much whiter. Still pretty good texture, seems a little bit thinner. The layer of foam isn't quite as thick as it was with the first one with the instant coffee, and definitely not the espresso based one, but we're still looking pretty good. The texture's good. I think having the additional capsule, even though we're going to be lower on the extraction scale, is good because it's not got too much water in there, which would have reduced that texture even more. It looks pretty good. Let's give it a little taste. Yeah, lacking in coffee flavor really. It's nice, but it's not really coffee forward, I wouldn't say. It's still got plenty of sweetness even though we've omitted the sugar, and you've got a lot more of the booze coming through. So my least favorite so far, despite the fact we can actually add better coffee to this, we're struggling to get the extraction up where we need it to be and the intensity. Not a bad drink by any stretch of the imagination, but probably not optimal. So I like this. When you've got tips for using capsules, you want to choose great capsules, which are quite readily available. You want to omit the sugar syrup because you're going to get plenty of sweetness coming through from the coffee liqueur, which won't be masked by the intensity of the coffee. We want to purge our machine before we use it, and we want to use 2 capsules to up the intensity. Not bad, but not my favorite. So let's have a look at coffee concentrate now. So there are a number of different espresso strength cold brew concentrates on the market, and the highest in terms of our TDS, our total dissolved coffee solids I've found, is Solo. So we're going to give this a go, and we're going to shake up an espresso martini using this. I do know the TDS is around about 4.42, which again, much stronger than filter coffee, but quite significantly less intense than espresso, which starts at around 8 TDS, roughly speaking, aiming for sort of 9 to 10.5 for our well-extracted espressos. And we're going to give this a go now. So again, with the concentrate, we're looking at a lower TDS than the espresso. So we're going to get more of the other ingredients coming through, less coffee dominance. So I'd suggest reducing or omitting the sugar. And let's have a look at the texture. So we're not quite as thick as definitely espresso or our super strong instant coffee, but we're probably closer to the capsule, which would make sense because we've got the same sort of intensity. We've got a slightly darker color on there as well. Let's give this a go. I mean, it's really tasty. It's actually really quite similar to the Capsules. So Solo is a blend of Brazilian and Colombian coffees. If you drink it on its own, it's pretty chocolatey, really quality driven in terms of the coffee. The pros of this, it's super easy to prepare. You literally pour it out of a carton from the fridge. It's very affordable. This is about £10 for a carton, and it's really clean, really tasty. I'd say you don't quite get the texture you get from the espresso, but yeah, tastes really good. Reduce down the sugar a little bit and you're in a pretty good place. So that's our coffee concentrate espresso martini. And now we're going to start looking at some things which we're actually brewing ourselves. So coffee nerds out there will be twitching because I've spoken about TDS, our total dissolved solids of coffee in the drink, but not talking about extraction. So under and over extraction have obviously flavor implications, and we're going to try and get as close to the TDS, but also the extraction level you'd find in espresso. First of all, using an Aeropress with a fellow Prismo. So next up, we're actually going to brew some coffee ourselves. So for all the previous espresso martinis, we've not been able to control how the coffee is extracted. We've just been able to control how much goes in. But for this method, we're able to control our extraction. So for this, we're going to be using the MAHLKONIG X54, which is an amazing grinder, works for the full spectrum of brewed coffees, including espresso, and is pretty much a zero retention grinder in my experience. So if I put 20 grams in, I pretty much get 20 grams out. For this method, you want to grind as fine as you can to get as high an extraction yield as possible. And we're going to grind it off now. And then for this method, we're going to be using an Aeropress, which many of you might have at home, but also the fellow Prismo filter. So this has a metal filter inside. It's reusable, which is obviously great for the planet. It does allow some of the fines through into the cup, which is actually desirable for an espresso martini, because we want to get that really nice texture. And we're going to put 20 grams into our Aeropress. I'm using boiling water because I want it to be as extracted as possible. And we're going to add between 60 and 65 grams of water just at boiling point to get that 40 gram yield we're looking for. So this is like strong. We're trying to get as close to that espresso recipe as possible. Going to fully stir this for about a minute. After a minute of stirring, back and forth, we're just going to pop on the cap, leave it for another minute, and come back to this at the 2-minute point on our timer. And after 2 minutes, we're going to press into a metal jug, I prefer. It makes me twitch when people use glass jugs for this, especially when it's super fine. Going to give that a little swirl, and then we're going to press for around about 30 seconds. This is pretty tough. The coffee's ground pretty fine, but that kind of bodes well because we're trying to get as high a strength in there and high extraction by getting as much from that coffee as possible. So the super fine grind, the boiling water, and the long extraction time of 2.5 minutes, much longer than an espresso, kind of gives us a good chance of doing that. And then we've got our fellow Prismo Aeropresso, you could call it. And this should come out around about 8 TDS, which is pretty high. So we're getting pretty close to espresso strength. This equates to an extraction of between 16 and 17% for you espresso nerds out there, which is kind of low, but we're trying to get as much as possible. Getting much higher than that's pretty challenging because we've really pushed the variables as much as we can, but should still be a really tasty espresso martini. So let's shake that up. All right, now we're cooking. This is looking good. So this is the Aeropresso with the fellow Prismo. Let's have a look at this. Yeah. This definitely looks more like the espresso martinis we've been making. I'm also able to choose the coffee with this brew method. So this is a natural Brazil, full of those kind of chocolatey, nutty, creamy sort of flavors. Texture-wise, it looks good. So we had a TDS of 8, just about, I think it was 7.97 with our extraction with the Aeropress. It gives much better texture, it's darker, which is a good sign. But the proof is in the tasting. Let's have a look. Oh yeah. I think we're at the business end of things now. This is like legit espresso martini texture. Much better coffee quality than the instant because we've been able to choose the coffee we brew. I've also kept the sugar in the recipe because we've got the high intensity from the coffee. Good foam. Still perhaps a little bit light on coffee if I'm being really critical. We're not matching the kind of intensity we found from the Slayer shots in the first Ultimate Espresso Martini video, but for home, you'd be pretty delighted with this. So the X54 has pulled out loads of flavor, really well ground, but I do have one more trick up my sleeve. So next we're going to try out the Wacaco Picopresso and see how we go with this. So last but not least, we've got the Wacaco Picopresso. And this thing's kind of blown my mind, to be honest. It's very compact, everything's within this unit, and it creates pretty legitimate espresso, pretty much. So we've got the pump in motion using this guy, which allows us to generate some pressure. It's got a naked screen underneath so you can see what's going on. And you do get real good crema, really nice mouthfeel, texture, high extractions, around about 20-21% for those of you looking at numbers. And it's legit, to be honest. So I'll do a full video where I really delve deeper into this and how I get the very best results for myself out of it. But we're gonna grind 20 grams of coffee, we're gonna pull it to a 40 gram yield, and we're gonna extract over around about 50 seconds. So we'll grind the coffee on the X54. So we've got that. I've preheated everything on the Picopresso, which is highly recommended. Gonna use this nifty little collar to get the coffee into the basket. I do recommend a little WD-T just to mix this all together and break up any little clumps if you have any, although you don't get too many clumps from the X54. And then we're going to use the nifty little tamper to get a first press. And just double check that. Pop this underneath with the shower screen on, don't forget that. Then we're going to add the boiling water to the top of it. And I will give a full how-to on this brewer at some point in the near future because I think it's really, really quite good, especially for travel and that kind of thing. And then we're going to pump into our glass. So, going to start the timer and start pumping. I like to do a little 10-second sort of pre-saturation. You also have to kneel down for this, it's the only way to do it. Have a look at the naked basket and then we're gonna pick up where we left off after a 10-second hold. And just like in our Ultimate Espresso Martini video, we're aiming for our yield to be 40 grams. And we're gonna get as high an extraction as we probably can from this thing by grinding pretty fine. We're also using boiling water, preheating everything, but I'll measure where we're at. Hopefully we're pretty close to espresso strength. And I like this, you can just do the little cut as soon as you get to your 40 gram yield, so 40.2. You've got genuine crema from all the pressure you've generated in there as well. I'll measure the TDS just quickly. So let's have a look at the Picopresso Martini, if you want. Oh, yeah. This is so much better, I can tell already. The texture looks really good. Got really nice foam on there. It's got a nice dark color. I'm hoping for plenty of coffee flavor, although I could be wrong, but the numbers tell me I should hopefully be right. Yeah, I mean, this is comfortably the best one we've tried today. Much more coffee flavor, much more texture. Everything ties in really nicely because you've got that coffee intensity to bring it together. It's also well extracted. So this is an impressively high extraction at about 20%. Compliments to the grinder and the Pico for that. So again, massive thank you to MAHLKONIG and Wacaco for sending these out. It's a bloody good espresso martini. I think for the value you're getting for these two pieces of kit, it's going to be pretty hard to beat. Obviously, when you've got an incredible espresso machine, an incredibly expensive commercial grinder, whereas this is more of a domestic grinder, you are going to be able to elevate it even further. But for what you're getting, for the price, this is incredible. Yeah, nice work, Wacaco. Nice work, MAHLKONIG. And hopefully it makes you want to drink espresso martinis at home. It definitely does for me. So I guess I should briefly summarize everything we've seen today and what we've learned. So there we have it. 5 different ways of making espresso martinis at home, ranging from pretty good to exceptional, I'd say. And to summarize, instant coffee, actually with good quality instant coffee, can be pretty good. You have to add a lot in there to get the strength and intensity up there, but texturally, it's pretty great. Flavor-wise, you're perhaps limited by the quality of the coffee you're putting in, but if you can find amazing instant coffee, you should make a pretty great espresso martini at home. Capsules are amazing for what they do. They're not designed to be espresso, and I think that shows. So you're getting much lower coffee flavor, much less intensity from the drink, which means you should probably cut out the sugar. And I think if I were going to do this, I'd drink the capsules as they are because they're delicious. They're an incredible brew method, but they're not designed to be espresso. So perhaps it's unfair to treat them as an espresso martini base. Coffee concentrate, quite impressive. The big benefit is it's really easy, really kind of accessible. You can just pour this straight in, make a pretty decent espresso martini. But similar challenges to the capsules, you're not quite getting the intensity you're looking for in the drink. Then we started brewing our own coffees using the MAHLKONIG, and to begin with, the Aeropress with the fellow Prismo. This was really good. It was slightly under extracted, so we struggled to pull as much flavor from the coffee itself in order to get it to that amazing, intense, coffee forward flavor characteristic, although it was pretty close. So this is a really good option. If you have one of these, I think you're in a good place and you can really work to push that extraction up, get the strength and intensity really high, and you should be pretty good. But I do think the undeniable star of the show is the Wacaco Picopresso, which gave loads of kind of coffee flavor, good quality coffee flavor as well. It's not the easiest to use. In fact, it's definitely the hardest, but if you get this right, you can really get exceptional coffee. So choose great coffee. Whichever one you go for, make sure you enjoy it. Coffee cocktails are fun, right? That's the most important thing. I will follow this with a deeper dive on the Picopresso and X54 because I genuinely think they're incredible options for home, and I've really enjoyed learning how to get the very best out of them in my opinion. So keep an eye out for that. And if you enjoy this kind of thing, make sure you subscribe to the channel, make sure you like this video, share it with all your friends, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon. So enjoy some coffee cocktails, and I'll see you again.